You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Proof Text. I am Michael Halcomb, and this is a Fallacy of the Week episode. For the last several episodes in this series or mini-series, whatever you want to call it, sub-series, the Fallacy of the Week segments, I've been sharing with you particular fallacies. And today I want to talk a little bit more about logical fallacies, but then also talk a little bit about biases. So welcome back to the podcast. And today we're thinking about this wide world of critical thinking, human cognition, and trying to unravel some of these concepts of logical fallacies and biases, and thinking about their influence on our world today and our society, our everyday lives. And so I think it's critical, as I've tried to make clear as long as I've been doing this series, to understand the nuances of logical fallacies and the terminology that comes along with that, because this plays a really important role in how we perceive information and how we make decisions based on the information we receive. So actually, let's start, as I said, by distinguishing between logical fallacies on the one hand and biases on the other hand. All right, so logical fallacies are essentially flaws in logic, flaws in reasoning, and those flaws weaken the validity or veracity of arguments. So put simply, logical fallacies weaken arguments. Logic fails, logic flaws, they weaken arguments. That's what a logical fallacy is. These are like pitfalls, and these pitfalls are going to divert us or keep us from the path of sound logic, traveling down the path of sound logic, because we fall into these pitfalls. So, I mean, you can imagine, right, that somebody is contending, arguing that because a famous celebrity endorses a certain brand of shampoo or deodorant, then it must be the best on the market. Now, that's just ridiculous. This argument, what it's doing is relying on the celebrity's fame rather than the actual effectiveness of the shampoo or the deodorant. And so this is an appeal to authority fallacy. Again, appeals aren't always bad, but when they're logically fallacious and when they're attempting to deceive, they are. You can appeal to authority, you can appeal to different things, and that's not always wrong. But whenever you're running into misleading information because of the appeals, then it's wrong. Whenever someone's trying to use those things to manipulate, then it's wrong. Biases, on the other hand, are more about our predispositions or our tendencies to think or act in certain ways based on our personal beliefs, based on our personal experiences, based on our personal preferences. And that word personal before all those is very important. Personal beliefs, personal experience, personal preferences, because these biases can subtly influence our judgment and our decision making in us personally without us even realizing it. For example, confirmation bias. Most people have heard of this. This occurs when we seek out or interpret data or information in a way that just simply is going to confirm our existing beliefs. This happens all the time. So, right, if somebody really believes that climate change is a thing, then they're going to pay attention to only the data that supports that. If somebody, on the other hand, believes that climate change is a hoax, then they'll probably only pay attention to information that supports that. And so it happens on both sides, even in the center, where people pay attention to certain bits of information while ignoring evidence to the contrary. So let's think about a few more of these kinds of biases. There are a lot of them, and we'll illustrate some of them. So maybe you've never heard of this one. This is called the anchoring bias. Anchoring, like an anchor that a ship drops into the sea. The anchoring bias. And this occurs when someone relies too heavily on the first piece of information that they encounter when making decisions. Like, so it's like, this might appeal to someone who's very impulsive. You can imagine yourself at like a real estate auction, right? The bidding starts and it's at a really high price. And if the property's actual value is a lot lower and everybody knows that, then the initial high bid can like anchor your perception of its worth, right? So if it's worth 100 grand, but the bid starts at 600 grand, well, you hearing that and seeing that, you're thinking, oh, there must be more here than meets the eye. It must be worth more than I initially thought, and that's going to, bias you. So you might end up bidding more than you intended because you were influenced by that initial anchor. This is called an anchor bias. Another example of an anchor bias, like you see this often in salary negotiations, right? You can think of it like a job candidate's previous salary is used as, say they're making 50 grand a year, and that's used as the anchor point for determining their new salary. And when that happens, it can unfairly limit their potential earnings, regardless of their qualifications for the job or the market rate or the position, so on and so forth. Right? That initial bit of information, what you start with, colors everything else. You got to be really careful about that. It's based on like first impressions, that whole judging a book by its cover kind of thing. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So we got to be really attuned to that. You may meet someone and not like them right off the bat, or they give you like a bad feeling, but in turn, they're a good person and it was just not a good initial meeting. But if you're going to let that frame how you look at them forever, that's an anchor bias. Another one that you might not be aware of is called selection bias. And this occurs when we selectively focus on certain aspects of a situation while ignoring others. That's what a lot of these biases have to do, right? Dialing into one thing, but ignoring other data. And when this happens, it can lead to really distorted conclusions. You think about like a drug company, a pharmaceutical company that's conducting some like medicine trial or drug trial. If they only include participants in that who are likely respond well to the drug, and they exclude those who might get severe side effects, well, then the trial results are going to overestimate the drug's effectiveness and not report on its ineffectiveness or its bad side effects. So selection bias, we see this all the time. We're getting ready to head into the 2024 election as I'm recording this, but we see this all the time in surveys and polls, right? Where specific respondents are selected to participate, or even self-select to participate. So you can imagine like a survey being sent out about a smartphone. It's conducted online. And these people take this, and this online poll, it may disproportionately represent younger demographics who are more active on the internet. And it may then lead to biased results that don't accurately reflect the entire population's habits. What about the older people who didn't do it? What about the even younger people who didn't do it? What about the people who weren't able to get internet access that day? And so on and so forth. So it's this selection bias. Another bias is attentional bias. This one's kind of interesting. And again, you might not be aware of this, but this is our tendency to focus more on certain stimuli. There it is again, focusing on one thing, ignoring others, but we're focusing our attention more on certain stimuli and ignoring others, or while ignoring others. And a classic example of this is like the cocktail party effect, where we're able, like imagine you're in a room, like a big party, like a cocktail party. You're in this big room, lots of people talking, lots of noise, music playing, but you are able to tune in to a single conversation amid that noisy room, right? Your attention is dialed into that. In an everyday life scenario, attentional bias, it can come up in a lot of different ways. Like imagine you're at your job, you go in for a review, you get some negative feedback, but you also get some positive feedback. But when you leave the meeting, all you heard pretty much was the negative feedback. You're so dialed into that, your attention's so focused on that you don't even remember any of the positive feedback, and there was more of it, maybe. Right? You've become like hyper aware and therefore hyper fixated on that one thing. That's where all your attention is. And so these kinds of biases, like I said, they significantly influence our perceptions and our decisions, and they can often lead us astray even without our awareness, right? And so recognizing them and understanding them, developing sharper critical thinking about them, helps us make more informed choices about our daily lives. So we have the emotional bias, or the selection bias, the attentional bias. We also mentioned the anchor bias and even the confirmational bias. All right, we may talk more about biases in the future. I think these are really interesting alongside, logical fallacies and appeals and these sorts of things. Yeah, so, all right, friends, I'm going to stop there and say I hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.